When your own child looks you in the eye and says, "Find somewhere else to die. You're useless now," something inside you shatters. I remember standing there, suitcase in hand, heart thudding so hard it felt like it might give out on the spot. The words came from Victoria, my daughter, my only child, the one I had carried in my body, the one I had raised with every ounce of care a mother can muster. Yet in that moment, she was a stranger. A cold, calculating stranger in designer heels, tapping her foot as if I was a burden making her late for dinner. I packed my bags like the obedient mother I had always been. 53 years of life compressed into 2 suitcases and a cardboard box of photographs. No heirlooms, no furniture, not even my favorite teacup. Just what I could carry in trembling hands. Each fold of clothing into the suitcase felt like a funeral, not just for my marriage, but for the woman I had been, the dependable wife, the careful mother, the silent support. I thought grief had broken me when Robert, my husband of 43 years, collapsed from a heart attack. But grief has a strange rhythm. It hurts, then soothes, then hurts again. Betrayal, however, betrayal is constant, a pulse that won't let you sleep. 3 days later, I was sitting in a lawyer's office, staring at polished mahogany that reflected back a version of myself I barely recognized. Gray hair unbrushed, clothes wrinkled, dignity crumbling. I hadn't come for revenge, not yet. I had come because something gnawed at me in that dim motel room where Victoria dumped me with $200 in cash. Like tipping a maid, Robert had been meticulous about his affairs, obsessive about order, never sloppy with documents. And yet, my daughter claimed he had left me nothing. That didn't make sense. It scratched at me in the dark like a rat behind the walls, keeping me awake. What I didn't know then was that Robert, my supposedly loving husband, had been playing the longest, quietest chess game of his life, and Victoria, his darling princess, was about to learn that sometimes the pawn becomes the queen. If you're watching this, I hope you never experience what I did. But stay with me, because this isn't just about betrayal. It's about rebirth. This is the story of how I went from discarded widow to the woman holding every card on the table. And honey, trust me, this tale has more twists than a pretzel factory. 2 months ago, I was Margaret Sullivan, a woman defined by her titles: wife, mother, caretaker. Devoted for 43 years, never rocking the boat, never asking for more than my share. My daughter was my pride, even when she was ungrateful. My husband was my anchor, even when his affection was uneven. Life was stable, ordinary, predictable. And then, one afternoon, in the quiet click of a heart giving out, everything I knew collapsed. Robert was gone, and with him, the structure of my life. Grief is supposed to bring families together, but in mine, it brought out fangs. Victoria swooped in during my mourning like a vulture circling carrion. Her tone was sweet, too sweet, dripping with concern. "Mom, you can't possibly manage this big house alone. The stairs, the maintenance, all those memories. It's not healthy." If I'd been less broken, I might have seen it for what it was. Calculation dressed up as compassion. But in those early weeks, I clung to her presence like a drowning woman to driftwood. I wanted to believe my daughter loved me, that she was looking out for me. I wanted to believe blood meant loyalty. I should have known better. Robert had always doted on her, spoiled her, raised her to believe the world bent for her smile. When she married Kevin, the investment banker with polished shoes and a polished conscience. Robert treated them both like royalty. I was there, cooking, cleaning, keeping things smooth, but invisible all the same. And invisibility becomes habit. You stop questioning it. Until one day, someone tells you outright, "You don't matter anymore." Victoria thought she had played me. She thought the game was hers. But sitting in that lawyer's office, broken though I was, I felt the faint stirrings of something else. A small ember of suspicion. Of defiance. The story of my downfall, it turned out, was only the beginning of my rise. Before Robert's death, my life was a rhythm of routines, steady, predictable, safe. Every morning, I brewed his coffee exactly the way he liked it. 2 sugars, a splash of cream, stirred clockwise. That detail mattered to him. He liked precision, control, rituals. To most, it seemed charming, but to me, it became a quiet law of marriage. Margaret, the caretaker. Margaret, the reliable one. Margaret, the background to his story. And for 43 years, I accepted it. I thought love was sacrifice, that a good wife was someone who made herself small so her husband and child could be big. I didn't realize that shrinking day after day eventually erases you. Victoria, my only child, was the star of Robert's life, his little princess, adored from the moment she could walk. I don't resent a father's love for his daughter. That bond is supposed to be sacred. What I resented, though, was how it eclipsed everything else. He saw her ambitions as brilliance, her flaws as quirks. When she snapped at me, Robert smoothed it over. When she wasted money, Robert called it generosity. When she grew cold, Robert told me she was independent, just like him. But she wasn't like him. She was worse. By the time she was grown, Victoria had perfected the art of charm. She could tilt her head, widen her eyes, and suddenly you felt like denying her anything was cruelty itself. When she married Kevin, that investment banker with the dazzling smile and Rolex shining like a sunbeam, Robert swelled with pride. An advantageous match, he called it, as if he'd orchestrated a chessboard wedding. Their union produced 2 grandchildren, and Robert poured his devotion into them as if love was a currency he could only spend on Victoria's side of the family. Meanwhile, I remained the woman behind the curtain. The cook, the cleaner, the keeper of secrets and schedules, just the wife. After Robert's funeral, Victoria's mask of concern was flawless. She hugged me too tightly, pressed tissues into my hand, spoke in that honeyed tone that fools outsiders but not mothers. "Mom, this house is too much for you now. You can't manage it all alone. It's not safe." She said the word safe like it was a knife, cutting me down to a frail old woman who couldn't climb a staircase. She brought Kevin over for family dinners. They sat across the table like real estate agents dressed as angels, sliding pamphlets toward me with manicured fingers. Brochures of retirement communities, resorts for the elderly, where I'd have bingo nights and shuffleboard instead of dignity. "Mom, you'd have people your own age. Activities, no responsibilities. Isn't that wonderful?" Wonderful. That's what they called exile. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as an obstacle. But in my grief, I let the words soak in. I told myself maybe they were right. Maybe I was too old, too tired. Maybe I really couldn't manage the house where every hallway echoed with Robert's voice. My body still carried the weight of his absence, waking at dawn to find his side of the bed cold, passing the study and hearing silence instead of his typewriter keys. Maybe they were just trying to help, I told myself. Maybe they cared. The truth is, I was desperate for someone to care. That desperation blinded me. It wasn't until later that I'd see the calculation beneath their smiles. Kevin, ever polite, didn't quite meet my eyes when he spoke about financial logistics. Victoria, rehearsed in her role, pressed her hand over mine, sighing about what Dad would have wanted. Their words braided together like a rope tightening around my neck. And still, I stayed silent, because silence had been my specialty for decades. What I didn't know then was that silence was the very weapon Victoria counted on. She thought I'd surrender like I always had. She thought I'd retreat into the quiet role of grateful mother, content with whatever scraps she offered. But grief has a strange way of reshaping a person. In my silence, something sharper was forming. A patience. A waiting. Like the steady drawing back of a bowstring, preparing for the shot. I didn't know it yet, but my daughter's game had already begun, and she had underestimated her opponent. The campaign to push me out of my own home didn't happen all at once. It was a slow drip, like water on stone. Little comments dropped at dinner. Side remarks said with a smile. Every visit from Victoria and Kevin was another subtle attempt to chip away at my will. "Mom, you shouldn't be climbing those stairs at your age. It's dangerous. Think about all the maintenance, plumbing, electricity, the yard. Isn't it exhausting? Wouldn't it be nice to have people around, a community, instead of rattling around this big old house by yourself?" Each line delivered like concern, wrapped in silk but sharp beneath the surface. The truth was simple. They wanted the house, the money, the legacy. But to admit that would be ugly. And my daughter, my elegant, polished daughter, never liked to look ugly. They came armed, too. Pamphlets slid across my dining table, glossy brochures filled with smiling seniors holding wine glasses in landscaped courtyards. Retirement communities with slogans like, "Live free, live happy," and "The next chapter starts here." I studied the pictures sometimes, alone at night. Not because I wanted to go, but because part of me wondered if this was the future everyone expected for me. Women like me, invisible widows, sent off to live among strangers until the last page of their story closed. It terrified me, and Victoria knew it. Kevin, always the diplomat, leaned on numbers. He'd sip his wine, then explain property taxes, upkeep costs, financial burdens. He spoke like he was reading from a spreadsheet, but every word was a push. "You can't handle this. You shouldn't handle this. Let us take care of it." What he meant was, let us take it. I tried to push back once, timidly. "Your father built this house. It's our home. He wanted me here." Victoria's lips tightened just slightly before she arranged her face back into pity. "Mom, it's just too much for you. All those memories. Don't you see how unhealthy that is? You need a fresh start." Unhealthy. That word stung worse than any insult. As if my grief was a disease and the cure was giving her everything. But this was how Victoria worked. She'd been manipulating me since she was a teenager. When she wanted new shoes, she'd sigh about how all the other girls had them. When she wanted to skip family dinners, she'd cry about how school was overwhelming. And Robert, my husband, would always take her side. He'd tell me I was being too hard, too demanding. He'd remind me she was sensitive. So I learned to swallow my protests, to smooth the path for her. It was easier than fighting both of them, and like any habit practiced long enough, it became instinct. That instinct nearly destroyed me. Looking back, I see it clearly. Victoria's words weren't invitations. They were rehearsals. She wasn't asking me to move. She was preparing me for the moment she'd force me out. Every dinner, every pamphlet, every sigh about my safety was part of her strategy. She knew I was vulnerable. She knew grief made me pliable. And she was sharpening her knives. The cruelty wasn't in the final betrayal. It was in the slow erosion. The way she smiled while dismantling my life. The way Kevin raised his glass and toasted to new beginnings while plotting my end. At the time, I told myself they loved me. That they were misguided, not malicious. But love doesn't corner you in your own dining room. Love doesn't hand you brochures for exile. No. Love defends. Love protects. Love remembers. What I got from my daughter was not love. It was strategy. And soon, she would make her move. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of day that starts ordinary and ends like a car crash you never saw coming. I was in the kitchen, boiling water for tea, when I heard the front door open. Victoria's voice carried through the hallway, cheerful, rehearsed, too cheerful. She swept in with Kevin at her side, both dressed like they'd come from a boardroom, not a family home. Behind them were 2 large suitcases. For a second, I thought they'd arrived for a trip, maybe surprising me with an overnight stay. My heart fluttered with a ridiculous, fragile hope. Then, Victoria dropped the bomb. "Mom, we've made a decision," she said, like she was announcing a promotion. "Kevin got the transfer into town, and we need to move immediately. This house is perfect for us." I stared at her, teacup trembling in my hand. Move in? But this was my home. My sanctuary. The walls still smelled like Robert's cologne. His shirts still hung in the closet. "I don't understand," I whispered. "This is my house?" That's when her mask slipped. Just for a moment. The softness vanished, replaced by something hard and cold. The steel beneath the sugar. "Actually, Mom," she said, her tone flattening. "According to Dad's will, I inherited everything. The house, the investments, all of it. I've been letting you stay here out of kindness, but it's time for you to find your own place." The words slammed into me. Find your own place. I shook my head. No, Robert wouldn't. There must be some mistake." "No mistake." Her eyes gleamed with a cruel satisfaction. "Dad knew I'd take better care of his legacy than you ever could. You never understood money or investments. You were just the wife." Just the wife. 3 words that gutted me more than any insult ever could. 43 years of marriage, reduced to a supporting role. Invisible labor, invisible sacrifices, invisible me. Then she delivered the final blow, the one that still echoes in my bones. "Find somewhere else to die. You're useless now." The world went silent. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even cry. My own daughter had pronounced my obituary while I was still standing there in my kitchen. I packed my things in a daze, hands moving mechanically while my mind screamed. 2 suitcases, 1 small box of photos, a lifetime crammed into luggage like I was nothing more than an overstaying guest. Victoria stood in the doorway, checking her watch as if I were making her late for a meeting. "There's a nice senior complex on Maple Street," she said with false brightness. "Very affordable. I'm sure they have openings." Affordable. As if the woman inheriting millions was sending me to bargain bin retirement. Kevin carried my suitcases to their BMW, his expression efficient, detached, like he was taking out the trash. "Margaret, you'll love having your independence again," he said, not meeting my eyes. Independence. What he meant was no home. As the car pulled away, I looked out the window. The house I had tended for 4 decades, Robert's garden, Victoria's birthday balloons still faintly visible in my mind. The dining room where I'd poured wine at every family holiday shrunk into the distance. It wasn't my home anymore. It was theirs. The irony cut deep. I had poured my life into making that house a refuge, a place where everyone else belonged. And now, I was the outsider. I didn't cry. Not then. I was too hollow, too stunned. All I felt was the sharp edge of betrayal, slicing deeper with every mile we drove away. The Sunset Inn was exactly what you'd expect from a place charging $49 a night. A sagging mattress that smelled faintly of mildew. Towels so thin they could have been napkins. Carpet patterned with stains from decades of other people's despair. Kevin set my bags down like he was finishing a chore, not discarding a human being. Victoria pressed 2 crisp $100 bills into my palm. Her tone was breezy, rehearsed, as if she were tipping a waitress. "This should cover you for a few days while you get settled. We'll transfer some money into your account once we sort through Dad's paperwork." Some money. From my own inheritance. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving me in that stale motel room. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the faded wallpaper. For a moment, I couldn't even process it. Just hours before, I'd been in my kitchen, my house, boiling water for tea. Now, I was a displaced widow with 2 suitcases and a box of photographs, an exile in a room where strangers had lived and left and been forgotten. That night, as the traffic roared outside the window and the thin mattress groaned beneath me, the weight of it all came crashing down. Grief for Robert, betrayal by my daughter, the humiliation of being discarded. I clutched the photo box like a life raft. Wedding pictures, family birthdays, Robert's smile frozen in time. The man who'd held my hand through my mother's death, who'd brought me flowers every anniversary. He would never have left me with nothing. I knew him. He could be stubborn, patronizing about money, but cruel? Never. Victoria's words replayed in my head like a poison loop. Just the wife. Useless now. Find somewhere else to die. Do you know what it feels like when your child, the very person you gave your body, your years, your soul to, looks at you as disposable? It is a grief deeper than the grave, because death is natural, betrayal is chosen. But even in that pit, something stirred. A flicker of defiance. Robert had been meticulous about his affairs. Obsessed, even. He used to line up papers on his desk with military precision. He had shown me the will once, years ago. He had explained it carefully, making sure I understood. And what Victoria told me? It didn't match. I lay awake that night, staring at the cracked ceiling, heart pounding. Maybe it was denial. Maybe it was desperation. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Victoria had lied, that she'd rewritten my husband's final words to erase me. The next morning, I slid a wrinkled $20 bill across the motel counter for a bus pass. Precious cash, but necessary. The bus rattled me into the city, every stop carrying me closer to the only man who could tell me the truth. Robert's lawyer, Harrison Fitzgerald. I didn't know it then, but stepping onto that bus was the first move in a new game. And this time, I wasn't just a pawn. The bus jolted along cracked streets, each stop reminding me how far I'd fallen. Just yesterday, I was the woman in the passenger seat of Robert's Buick, heading downtown with my husband beside me, his hand resting on the gear shift. Now I was a widow clutching a paper transfer slip, counting coins like a schoolgirl, praying the driver wouldn't notice my shaking hands. The city looked different from the window of a public bus. Familiar buildings felt foreign, as if the world itself had shifted since Robert's death. Couples walking hand in hand, businessmen with pressed suits and briefcases, students with earbuds. all moving with purpose while I drifted like debris. But under the grief, under the humiliation, something else burned. Suspicion. A tiny ember refusing to die out. Robert had been many things. Traditional, sometimes controlling. Often frustrating, but careless? Never. He'd been meticulous with documents, the kind of man who triple-checked contracts, who filed tax returns weeks early, who left color-coded binders for even the smallest investments. He didn't do messy, and he certainly didn't do cruel. Years earlier, I'd sat in his study, watching him polish his fountain pen before signing papers. "Margaret," he'd said, adjusting his glasses, "if anything ever happens to me, you'll know where everything is. I don't want you to be caught off guard." He'd even walked me through the will, patiently, methodically. I remembered his words. "You'll be taken care of. Always." So when Victoria said he'd left me nothing, I felt the lie settle heavy in my chest. She wasn't just greedy. She was rewriting my life. The bus hissed to a stop, brakes squealing. I stepped off into the downtown district, where tall glass buildings rose like watchful giants. Harrison Fitzgerald's office was on the corner, the brass plaque glinting in the sun. I wiped my palms against my skirt before stepping inside. The receptionist looked up with polite surprise. "Good morning, ma'am. Do you have an appointment?" "My name is Margaret Sullivan," I said, my voice unsteady but firm. "I need to speak to Mr. Fitzgerald. It's about my husband's estate." She froze for a moment, then offered a practiced smile. "One moment, please." Minutes later, a tall man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses appeared. His expression softened the instant he saw me. "Margaret, my dear, I was wondering when you'd come. I've tried calling the house several times, but Victoria said you were traveling." Traveling? My daughter had erased me with a single lie. I swallowed hard. "Mr. Fitzgerald, I need to ask you about Robert's will." His brows knit. "Didn't Victoria provide you with your copy?" I gave her the original and several duplicates after the reading. Reading. The word hit me like a slap. The reading? "Of course. You were supposed to be there. Victoria assured me you were too distraught, and that she'd handle everything. She promised you'd receive your inheritance." The room swayed. I gripped the edge of a leather chair to steady myself. "Mr. Fitzgerald?" I whispered. "I was never told about any reading. Victoria told me I inherited nothing." For the first time, his professional calm cracked. Alarm flashed in his eyes. He reached for a thick folder from the credenza. His movements were brisk now, urgent. "Margaret, that's impossible. Robert's will is very specific about your inheritance." He opened the folder, and there it was. Robert's familiar handwriting, his neat signature at the bottom. Witnessed, notarized, real. And as Mr. Fitzgerald began to read, my world shifted again. Harrison adjusted his glasses, his voice low and deliberate as he read the words that would change everything. "I, Robert James Sullivan, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath to my beloved wife, Margaret Ann Sullivan, the following. Our primary residence at 847 Oakwood Drive, including all furnishings and personal effects. Additionally, I leave her 70% of all financial assets, investments, and accounts, totaling approximately $23 million. $23 million! The number rang in my ears like church bells, so loud I almost couldn't hear the rest. My knees weakened, and I sank into the leather chair, gripping the armrests as if they could anchor me to the world. But Harrison wasn't finished. To my daughter, Victoria Sullivan Hayes, I leave $10 million to be held in trust. with distributions beginning on her 45th birthday, contingent upon her treatment of her mother following my death. Contingent. That single word glowed like fire on the page. Robert had known. Somehow, he had anticipated what Victoria would try to do. He had woven his protection into the will like a final shield around me, a clause designed not just to provide money, but to test her character. My breath came shallow. "Harrison, are you telling me that?" He nodded, his voice firm. "Yes, Margaret. Victoria lied. She not only misrepresented the will, she actively defrauded you. And in treating you as she has already violated the very condition of her inheritance." I pressed a hand to my mouth. My daughter, my flesh and blood, had not only betrayed me, but had cost herself everything in the process. The enormity of it all swirled in my head. While I had been sitting on a sagging motel bed, counting wrinkled bills, Victoria had been living in my house, playing queen of an empire she thought belonged to her. She must have felt untouchable, triumphant, but she hadn't realized Robert's love was sharper than her greed. Harrison leaned forward, his kind eyes fierce now. "Margaret, what Victoria has done constitutes elder abuse and fraud. These are serious felonies. She showed you forged documents or perhaps outdated drafts of the will. Either way, she acted with intent to deceive." I shook my head slowly, trying to reconcile it all. Victoria as a little girl, running through the yard in pigtails. Victoria on her wedding day, radiant in lace, Robert's proud arm linked with hers. That same daughter, now a criminal in designer shoes, willing to discard her mother like garbage. The grief in my chest cracked, and in its place rose something hotter. Anger. Not wild, screaming anger, but the cold, steady kind. The kind that sharpens you. I looked Harrison in the eye. "What do I do now?" His lips curved in the faintest smile. "Now, Margaret, we call the police. And then, we let Victoria learn the lesson your husband left behind." I sat there in Harrison's office, my pulse thundering in my ears as he closed the file and folded his hands on the desk. For a long moment, the world seemed to tilt sideways. $23 million. The house, 70% of everything Robert had built. All mine. Not because I demanded it, not because I fought for it, but because Robert had already seen the storm coming. And then the knife twisted deeper. Victoria had not only stolen my home, she had destroyed her own inheritance with her cruelty. That trust fund, her shiny $10 million, wasn't simply gone. It was now mine as well. Robert's will had been more than a legal document. It was a judgment, a mirror held up to her soul. I whispered, almost to myself. "She told me I was useless. She gave me $200 and sent me to a motel." Harrison's jaw tightened. "Then she's already forfeited her inheritance. Her behavior violates the very condition of the will. The law is on your side, Margaret. In fact, it's more than that. She has committed fraud, deception, and elder abuse. These are prosecutable crimes." The words hung heavy in the air. Fraud, elder abuse, terms you read about in newspapers, not in the story of your own family. My mind reeled back through every dinner where she slid brochures across the table. Every smile that hid calculation. Every time Kevin avoided meeting my eyes, like he was already complicit. They weren't looking out for me. They were predators circling, waiting for Robert to die so they could close in. I thought about the motel bed, the thin blanket that smelled of bleach, the shame of clutching that pitiful cash while my daughter swanned around in heels worth more than a week's stay. Rage flooded my veins, hot and steady, burning away the last of my paralysis. For decades, I'd been the quiet one, the background wife, the accommodating mother, the one who smoothed over tension and swallowed anger so everyone else could stay comfortable. But Robert, stubborn, perceptive Robert, must have known that one day I would need more than silence. One day, I'd need the truth. And here it was. I lifted my head, my voice steadier now. So, she didn't just betray me. She destroyed herself. Harrison gave a slow nod, his expression sharpening into something almost triumphant. Exactly. And it's time she learned that actions have consequences. I pressed my palms against my knees, steadying myself. My grief hadn't disappeared, but it had found a new companion: resolve. Victoria thought she'd cast me aside, erased me like a piece on her chessboard. But the game wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Harrison called it Operation Justice. The name almost made me laugh. Too neat, too clean for what I felt inside. This wasn't justice. This was war. The first step was the banks. With a few clipped phone calls, Harrison had every account Robert owned frozen pending verification. Savings, investments, credit cards, locked. The empire Victoria believed she controlled evaporated in a matter of hours. Detective Rodriguez arrived next, a woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She examined the forged documents Victoria had presented to me. "These aren't amateur," she said, running her fingers over the signatures. "This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment scheme. Someone planned this. Carefully." My stomach tightened. "Kevin!" Rodriguez gave me a grim look. "Almost certainly. Forging convincing legal documents requires more than a Google search." "He's got the financial connections, maybe even the criminal ones." I pictured Kevin in his tailored suits, raising his glass at family dinners, all the while plotting to dismantle my life. A man who saw me not as a mother-in-law, but as an obstacle. By mid-afternoon, the dominoes began to fall. Victoria's credit cards were declined at Neiman Marcus. The utility accounts she'd already transferred into her name, gas, electric, internet, were suspended pending investigation. Phone calls started flooding Harrison's office. Unknown numbers, blocked numbers, each one a frantic attempt to claw back control. I sat in Harrison's leather chair, feeling like an intruder in my own life. Me, the woman who had spent decades in the background, was suddenly the center of a storm. My daughter was unraveling, and the irony was delicious. She had been so eager to wear a crown that she'd tripped the very trap her father set for her. Rodriguez placed a folder in front of me. "This is elder abuse, Margaret. It's fraud. We're not just talking about civil disputes. We're talking about felonies. Your daughter and her husband have opened a door they won't be able to close." I traced my fingers over the folder's edge. Felonies, arrests, trials. These were words for strangers in the news, not for my family. Yet here we were. In that moment, I realized something unsettling. For the first time in months, no, years, I didn't feel powerless. I wasn't the grieving widow shuffled into a motel room. I wasn't the obedient wife in Robert's shadow. I wasn't the disposable mother Victoria thought she could discard. I was Margaret Sullivan, and my enemies were about to learn what that meant. The call came at 3:47 p.m. sharp. My phone buzzed across Harrison's polished desk, the screen lighting up with a name that once meant comfort, but now looked like a warning siren. Victoria. I answered, my voice steady. "Hello, Victoria." On the other end, her tone was tight, brittle. "Mom, where are you?" "Something's wrong. The bank accounts..." There's some kind of mix-up. Daddy's assets are frozen. I leaned back in the chair, letting the silence stretch, savoring her panic. I'm sitting in Harrison Fitzgerald's office. You remember him? Daddy's attorney. The one who read the real will to an empty room while you told him I was traveling. Silence. Not the confused kind, but the guilty kind. Then her voice, sharp with desperation. Mom, I don't know what you think you discovered, but I discovered. I cut her off. That you're a liar and a thief. The words tasted bitter and sweet all at once. Victoria tried to pivot, her voice sugar-coated again. Mom, listen. You've never had to deal with complicated investments, with managing this kind of money. I was just trying to protect you, to make things easier for you. The audacity made me laugh, short and humorless. Protect me? By forging documents and throwing me out of my own house? Mom, you're confused. You're grieving. Someone's clearly taking advantage of you. No! I snapped, my voice sharper than I expected. For once, Victoria, I am not confused. For once, I see everything clearly. And do you know what I see? A daughter who told her mother to find somewhere else to die. A daughter who cost herself $10 million because she couldn't show an ounce of respect. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. I could almost hear her calculating, scrambling for an angle, the way she always had since childhood. Manipulation was her second language. Mom, she said finally, her tone urgent now. Let's not fight. Can we meet? Somewhere private. We can work this out reasonably, without lawyers or police. I smiled coldly, though she couldn't see it. We'll meet soon enough, sweetheart. At the courthouse. When you're arraigned. The line went dead. Harrison looked at me, his expression both proud and grim. You've taken back the power, Margaret. But be prepared. People like Victoria don't surrender quietly. I nodded, gripping the phone tightly. For decades, I had been the mother who soothed, the wife who supported, the woman who stayed silent. Not anymore. Victoria had drawn her battle lines the moment she tried to erase me. Now, I was ready to fight. Victoria called again that night, this time from a blocked number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Her voice came fast, ragged at the edges. Mom, please, you don't understand what you're doing. If you press this, if you let Harrison go through with this, it'll ruin me. It'll ruin Kevin. It'll ruin the family. I held the phone against my ear, staring at the hotel curtains, thin enough to let the neon motel sign bleed through. The family? I repeated. You mean the one you tossed me out of like garbage? Her words tumbled over each other. Mom, I was stressed. I wasn't thinking straight. I just wanted to keep things organized. Kevin said we had to act quickly or the assets would get messy. I cut her off. Don't you dare try to pin this on stress. You had choices, Victoria. You had dignity in your hands, and you threw it away. Your father gave you $10 million, but he tied it to one simple condition. Respect me. And you couldn't even do that for 1 week. On the other end, I heard her breathing quicken, the sharp edge of panic creeping in. For once, her words didn't sound rehearsed. They sounded desperate. Mom, you can't let them arrest me. Think about the children, your grandchildren. Do you want them to grow up watching their mother go to prison? My heart tightened. She knew exactly where to aim. Those children, the only bright light in her marriage to Kevin. I had cradled them as newborns, rocked them to sleep while Victoria recovered from her C-sections. They weren't just her children. They were mine too, in a way. But I forced myself to remember. Every manipulator uses the softest part of you as their weapon. Victoria, I said quietly. You should have thought about your children before you stole from their grandmother, before you lied, before you threw me out of the house I built for you. Mom! Her voice cracked, a whimper now. No, I interrupted, my tone steel. You told me to find somewhere to die. Instead, I found the truth. And the truth says this: you're not only out of money, you're out of excuses. The police will be contacting you soon. The silence that followed was heavy, almost physical. Then a sob, muffled and raw. You're not serious. You wouldn't do this to me. You're my mother. Something cold crystallized in my chest. And you were supposed to be my daughter. I ended the call. For a long time, I sat in that dim motel room, the silence pressing in, the photo box still open on the bed. Robert's smile stared back at me from a framed picture of our 25th anniversary. His eyes seemed to ask me, do you see her clearly now? Do you see what I saw? I did, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the answer. They didn't even make it through dinner. At 8:30 p.m., while Victoria and Kevin were at Léonard, their favorite overpriced French restaurant, celebrating what they still believed was their flawless victory, the police walked in. According to Detective Rodriguez, she barely made it through the appetizer before officers surrounded the table. Victoria screamed about false arrest, her voice echoing through the restaurant like a siren. Patrons froze with forks halfway to their mouths as my daughter, the woman who'd once commanded every room with charm, was handcuffed between candlelit tables. She demanded her lawyer, only to learn Kevin's golf buddy had no experience with criminal law. Kevin was arrested the next morning at his office. Calm on the outside, but inside, they'd already traced the forgeries back to him. The printing company his firm used for shady investment prospectuses had been the same one that manufactured my fake will. It turned out my son-in-law had quite the criminal resume. Securities fraud, forged paperwork, a history of skating the edge of legality. And now, finally, the fall. I spent that first night back in my house, in the master bedroom. The bed smelled faintly of Robert's aftershave, though Victoria had already begun replacing his careful order with chaos. Designer clothes crammed into drawers, cosmetics scattered across the dresser. Her scent lingering where Robert's had once been. I packed everything into garbage bags and left them neatly by the front porch. Let her pick them up when she made bail. If she made bail. The house felt different that night. Not because Robert was gone. I'd been mourning that absence for weeks, but because I finally saw the house as mine. For 43 years, I had lived here as Robert's wife, arranging the rooms around his tastes, his rituals, his vision of what a home should be. I had never asked myself what I wanted the walls to hold, the rooms to become. But as I walked through the quiet halls, barefoot on the hardwood floors, I realized something astonishing. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was the scene of my resurrection. Victoria thought she'd stolen my future. Instead, she'd handed it back to me, wrapped in legal documents and police warrants. I crawled into bed and pulled the blanket to my chin. For the first time since Robert's heart stopped beating, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel erased. I felt something close to peace. By noon the next day, Harrison called with updates. His tone was brisk, almost energized, as though the drama of my family had jolted him years younger. Victoria's bail is set at $50,000, he said. Since all her accounts are frozen, she'll need outside help to cover it. And Kevin? I asked, bracing myself. 200,000. The judge wasn't impressed with his history of financial games. Securities fraud, Margaret. Did you know your son-in-law was already under investigation? I closed my eyes. Of course I hadn't known. I had been excluded from nearly every financial discussion for decades. Victoria and Kevin always spoke around me as though I were a child in the room, simplifying, condescending. It's complicated, Mom. You wouldn't understand. But I understood plenty, more than they ever gave me credit for. When Harrison paused, I surprised myself with the words that came out. I want to make changes to the house. It felt strange to say it out loud. For years, I had deferred. Robert didn't like bold colors. Robert wanted his study quiet. Robert thought a wine cellar would impress his colleagues. Even after he died, I kept living inside his design, as though altering a wall would erase him completely. But that morning, standing in my own kitchen with sunlight streaming across the countertops, I finally asked, "What do I want?" Victoria had already lined up contractors to gut the kitchen and convert Robert's study into a wine cellar. I laughed at the thought. A wine cellar, as if I needed another monument to her excess. "No," I told Harrison firmly. "I'll turn the study into an art studio. The wine cellar, I'll build a library instead." He smiled into the phone. "Excellent idea. It's your home now, Margaret. Do whatever makes you happy." Happy. The word landed in my chest like a challenge. What made me happy? I wasn't sure I knew the answer yet, but I knew one thing. It wasn't living by Robert's rules. It wasn't being managed by Victoria's ambition. It wasn't shrinking myself so other people could shine. Later that afternoon, the phone rang again. This time, an unfamiliar voice. "Mrs. Sullivan, this is Janet Cooper from Channel 7 News. We understand you're the victim of a significant elder fraud case involving your daughter. Would you be willing to share your story?" For a moment, I almost hung up. The idea of my private humiliation becoming public spectacle made my stomach turn. But then her words caught me. "Your story could help other seniors recognize warning signs of family financial abuse." Family financial abuse. That's what they were calling it now. Not just betrayal. Not just greed. Abuse. And suddenly, I realized my story wasn't just about me. How many other women had been dismissed as just the wife? How many other mothers had been treated as burdens once their usefulness expired? I didn't give Janet an answer right then. "Let me get back to you," I said, my voice even. I might have quite a story to tell. And as I poured myself a glass of wine that evening, Kevin's Christmas gift ironically, I thought about the possibility of telling the world what Victoria had done. Not for vengeance, not even for justice, but because maybe, just maybe, it was time for invisible women like me to be seen. The doorbell rang at 7 in the morning, sharp and insistent. Through the glass, I saw her. Victoria. Yesterday's clothes clung to her like wilted petals, makeup smeared, hair frayed. She looked older, smaller, like the shine had been stripped from her overnight. Somehow, she had made bail. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. The porch was boundary enough. "Mom, please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "We need to talk." I stood there in my robe, the morning sun spilling across the porch, and thought of the words she'd spat at me not long ago. "Find somewhere else to die. You're useless now." "We talked already," I said flatly. "You told me I was useless. I found somewhere else to live instead." Her eyes filled, red-rimmed, and swollen. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I'm still your daughter. Are you? The question came out colder than I expected. Because daughters don't forge legal documents to steal their mother's inheritance. Her mouth trembled. I wasn't stealing. I was... She stopped, realizing there were no words to soften it. No script she could run. No angle left to play. You were what, Victoria? I pressed. She looked down at her shoes. I was trying to protect you from yourself. You don't know how to handle money, Mom. You never have. I was making sure it didn't get wasted. I laughed, an ugly, broken sound. Protect me? You threw me out like trash. The truth finally stripped her bare. She sobbed, the kind of crying that crumples the face, messy and raw. Daddy never trusted me, did he? That's why he wrote that clause. Daddy worried about your sense of entitlement, I said evenly. He said you reminded him of his sister, beautiful, charming, and utterly incapable of thinking about anyone but herself. Her face went pale. That's a lie. I pulled my phone from my pocket. No, it isn't. I tapped the screen, and Robert's voice filled the porch. The video he'd recorded months before his death. His final safeguard. His tone was calm, deliberate. If you're hearing this, Victoria, it means my fears were justified. I hoped you'd prove me wrong. But if your mother is playing this recording, then you didn't. I leave you money contingent on how you treat her, because I spent 43 years watching her sacrifice everything for this family while you took it all for granted. She deserves more than scraps. She deserves respect. The message cut through her like a blade. By the time it ended, she was sobbing into her hands, mascara streaking her cheeks, shoulders shaking. He hated me, she gasped. I shook my head. No, Victoria. He loved you enough to hope you'd change. You're the one who proved him right. For the first time since this nightmare began, she looked at me, really looked. Not as a pawn, not as an obstacle, but as the woman who had finally outmaneuvered her. Her voice was small, broken. What happens now? Now, I said, you face the consequences, the fraud charges, the investigation. And when this story hits the news, the whole city will know who you really are. Her tears fell harder. She whispered, I just wanted security, status. I didn't want to worry anymore. I stared at her, my heart heavy. Wanting something doesn't excuse destroying people to get it. And in that moment, I understood. This was no longer a battle for money. It was a reckoning for a lifetime of choices. 3 days after Victoria's porchside collapse, another figure appeared at my door. Not my daughter this time, but Kevin's mother, Eleanor Hayes. If Victoria was polished marble, Eleanor was diamond, sharp, glittering, and cold enough to cut. Perfectly coiffed, dripping in gold, she swept into my living room as though I were a servant, showing her to a seat. Margaret, she said, crossing her legs with aristocratic ease. We need to discuss this situation rationally. I almost laughed. Rationally, as though her son forging legal documents and throwing me out of my own house was a minor family misunderstanding. Eleanor continued, her tone rehearsed. Kevin made some poor choices, yes, but prosecuting him seems vindictive. Surely we can resolve this in a way that doesn't destroy two families. Vindictive? I asked, my voice sharp. Your son conspired to steal $33 million from me. He helped my daughter commit fraud. He threw me into a motel room with nothing but 2 suitcases. You call that a poor choice? Eleanor's lips tightened, but her smile never slipped. Kevin was following Victoria's lead. He didn't understand the full situation. The audacity almost made me applaud. Kevin, a high-powered investment banker, a man who could read financial statements in his sleep, was suddenly a clueless puppy led astray by my daughter? She leaned in, lowering her voice. "We can make this disappear. Kevin's family is prepared to compensate you. $2 million in exchange for dropping the charges." $2 million? As if I were a fool willing to trade justice for a discount bribe. I straightened in my chair. "Your son participated in a conspiracy that nearly erased me from my own life. You think $2 million erases that?" Her eyes narrowed, the mask slipping for the first time. "Be realistic, Margaret. Kevin has a career, children, a reputation to maintain. Sending him to prison serves no one." "It serves justice," I said evenly. That cracked her composure. The sweetness drained from her face, leaving steel beneath. $5 million, she snapped. "Final offer. Take it, and we can all move on." The number was staggering, but I didn't flinch. This wasn't about money anymore. "My answer is no." Eleanor rose, gathering her handbag with slow precision. At the door, she turned back, her voice cold. "Very well, but you should know Kevin's legal team has found some irregularities in Robert's business records. Information that could shift the narrative of who the real criminal was. It would be unfortunate if that came out during trial." The threat hung in the air like smoke. As the door clicked shut behind her, a chill ran through me. Robert's files, his meticulous records, his endless binders. What had Kevin's people found? For the first time since this nightmare began, a sliver of doubt pierced my armor. What if Robert hadn't been the man I thought he was? That night, I sat in Robert's study, my study now, surrounded by the very files Eleanor had hinted at. His desk was as neat as ever, each folder labeled in his precise handwriting, each binder aligned like soldiers on parade. To anyone else, it looked like order. To me, it suddenly felt like secrets waiting to be unearthed. I pulled open a drawer and began sorting through documents, receipts, contracts, investment notes. At first, everything appeared ordinary, boring even. But then patterns began to emerge. Payments to companies with no real addresses. Consulting fees that were absurdly high for firms I'd never heard of. Money flowing in and out like tides, with no clear reason. At midnight, I pushed back from the desk, my pulse hammering. Robert, my Robert, the man who'd brought me flowers on anniversaries, the man who had held me through childbirth, who had sworn to protect me, had been hiding something. Something big. The next morning, I met Carol Chen, the private investigator Harrison recommended, a sharp-eyed woman with the posture of someone who saw straight through lies. She spent 6 hours combing through Robert's files, photographing pages, cross-referencing contracts with a speed that made my head spin. When she finally closed the last binder, her expression was grave. "Mrs. Sullivan," she said softly, "your husband was laundering money." The words hit like a brick to the chest. That's impossible. Robert was the most honest man I knew. "I'm sorry," she replied, her tone flat with certainty. "The evidence is overwhelming. For at least 12 years, Robert's consulting firm was funneling millions through shell companies tied to organized crime. He was washing dirty money and taking a cut." I stared at the piles of paper, at the neat signatures I knew as well as my own name. My world tilted sideways. Robert hadn't just lied. He'd built a second life behind my back. Carol's voice cut through my fog. "There's more. The $10 million Robert left Victoria? It came directly from laundered funds. If the FBI confirms this, they could seize everything. The house, the accounts, even your inheritance. I felt the blood drain from my face. Everything. The home I'd fought to reclaim, the future Robert promised me, it could all vanish with one government order. Carol hesitated, then added, "If Kevin's legal team already knows this, and I'd bet they do, they'll use it as leverage. They might even be planning to tip off the FBI in exchange for immunity." My daughter and her husband weren't just thieves. They were holding a loaded gun over my life, cocked and ready. For the first time, I wasn't just a betrayed widow. I was the widow of a criminal. And I realized with a sickening clarity, Robert hadn't just been protecting me from Victoria. He might have been protecting me from the truth. The phone rang just as Carol left, her warning still echoing in my ears. Victoria's number lit up the screen. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something told me this wasn't a call I could avoid. "Mom," she said, her voice tight, urgent. "We need to meet tonight. There are things you need to know about Daddy, things that change everything." I almost laughed, bitter and hollow. "I already know, Victoria. About the money laundering, about the shell companies, about how everything your father left us might be tainted." There was silence. Then her voice, low and sharp. "So you do know." My stomach clenched. "What are you planning, Victoria?" She didn't hesitate. "Kevin's lawyers are already in contact with the FBI. They're offering him immunity in exchange for information about Daddy's operation. Here's the deal. You get to keep the house and $5 million. Clean money. The rest goes to the government. And the fraud charges? They disappear. We all walk away." I gripped the phone tighter, my nails digging into my palm. $5 million. That was the bait. But the hook was obvious. Kevin and Victoria saving themselves by selling out Robert. By selling out me. "Victoria," I said slowly, "you're asking me to help you profit from your crimes by exploiting your father's crimes." "I'm asking you to be practical," she snapped. "The alternative is losing everything. And don't forget, Mom, if the FBI decides you benefited from criminal funds, they could come after you too." Her words were meant to scare me, and they did. Images flashed through my mind. The house seized, bank accounts drained. Me once again with nothing but 2 suitcases and a box of photos. But this time with federal charges hanging over my head. I looked around Robert's study at the carefully curated rows of books, the family photos, the desk where he had spent so many late nights. It was a shrine to the man I thought I knew. But now, every detail felt like a question mark. I forced my voice to stay calm. "I need time to think." "You don't have time," Victoria said quickly. "The meeting with the FBI is tomorrow morning. Kevin's lawyer needs an answer tonight." After we hung up, I sat in the darkened study, the silence pressing in like a weight. For 43 years, I had believed Robert was a good man. He wasn't perfect. He was stubborn, controlling at times, but I had trusted his integrity. Now I saw the cracks, the shadows he had hidden behind his meticulous order. And the bitter irony was this. My daughter, the thief who tried to erase me, was suddenly holding the key to survival. But she had underestimated one thing. I was no longer the woman who obeyed, who smoothed things over, who stayed quiet for the sake of peace. If the FBI was going to hear a story tomorrow, it would be mine. I picked up the phone again and dialed Carol. "How quickly can you get me a meeting with the Bureau?" I asked. "Because I have a truth to tell them, and I think they'll find it very interesting." The conference room reeked of stale coffee and secrecy. Across from me sat Agent Sarah Martinez, her face carved from stone. "Mrs. Sullivan, by coming forward, you admit you may have benefited from criminal funds. Do you understand that?" I understand, I said, but I'd rather give you the truth than let my daughter twist it into a weapon. So I laid it all out. Robert's hidden business, Victoria's lies, Kevin's forgeries, Eleanor's bribes. Every betrayal spilled into the recorder until my throat burned. When I finished, Martinez clicked off the tape. Her eyes softened, just a fraction. Your daughter thinks you'll fold. That fear will drive you. But I think anger drives you now. Anger can be useful. Would you wear a wire? 3 hours later, the device pressed against my chest felt heavier than armor. At 8 p.m., the knock came. Victoria entered in pearls, Kevin in his tailored suit with a briefcase. They looked like power. They looked like control. But they were already finished. "Mom!" Victoria said brightly, kissing my cheek as though she hadn't thrown me into a motel weeks before. "You look better." I held her gaze. Clarity has that effect. Kevin opened the briefcase, sliding papers across the coffee table. "We've structured this in your favor. You keep the house, $5 million in clean assets, and immunity from Robert's mistakes. The rest goes to the government. Everyone's protected." I touched the papers, then leaned back. "And what about the $33 million Robert left me?" They exchanged a glance. Kevin's voice hardened. "That money's tainted. $5 million is the best you'll get." I smiled faintly. "And you two?" "What do you get?" Kevin leaned forward, confident. "We put this misunderstanding behind us. Victoria's charges vanish. My reputation survives. The family heals." The tiny red light blinked beneath my blouse, recording every word. At my signal, the front door opened. Agent Martinez and 2 federal officers stepped inside. "Victoria Sullivan Hayes, Kevin Hayes," she announced. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, elder abuse, and attempted extortion." Victoria's face collapsed, mascara streaking. "Mom, how could you do this to your own daughter?" I met her eyes, steady at last. "The same way you forged a will and told me to die. Except my way is legal." As the handcuffs clicked shut, I felt Robert's house, my house, exhale around me. For the first time, I wasn't the obedient wife or disposable mother. I was Margaret Sullivan, and I was done being erased. The game Victoria thought she was playing was finally over. And this time, the Queen had taken the board.